Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to welcome you all for Exim Bank's 37th Commencement Day Annual Lecture. My name is Yogita Hatangadi, and I shall be your MC for this evening. To commence today's proceedings, it is my privilege to invite to the stage Mr. M. Nagraju, Secretary, Department of Financial Services, MOF, Government of India. Sir, please. I would also like to invite Ms. Kiko Honda, Professor, Waseda Business School, Waseda University, and Ms. Harsha Bangari, MD, Export-Import Bank of India. Over the years, the Commencement Day Lecture series has hosted several distinguished leaders, including London Business School's economics professor, Professor Ellen Ray, Nobel laureate Dr. Abhijit Banerjee, IMF First Deputy Managing Director, Professor Geeta Gopinath, former AFDB President, Dr. Donald Kaberuka, IMF Managing Director, Dr. John Lipsky, Professor of Economics and Law at Columbia University, Professor Jagdish Bhagwati, former Secretary General at UNCTAD, Mr. Supachai Panich-Pakdi, former PM of New Zealand, Right Honorable James Bolger, LSE Economics Professor, Professor Nicholas Stern, and former MD of Institute of International Finance, Mr. Charles Dallara. Most recently, the 36th lecture was delivered by Professor Arvind Panagriya on India's trade policy, the past, present, and future. And today, we have the honor of having Ms. Kiko Honda for the 37th Commencement Day Annual Lecture. We are delighted to inform you that we have received an overwhelming response for today's lecture from different parts of the world. And I would also like to inform you that we are currently live on Exim Bank's social media platforms. We will begin the evening with introductory remarks by Ms. Harsha Bangari, Managing Director, Exim Bank, followed by a special address which shall be delivered by Mr. M. Nagraju, Secretary, DFS, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Thereafter, we shall invite Professor Kiko Honda to deliver the lecture on the topic, Sustainable Investing, where it came from and where it is going. The lecture will be followed by a Q&A session moderated by one of India's finest business editor, Ms. Lata Venkatesh, who will also ask select questions received from the audiences. We have received several questions from participants in response to our social media campaign during the lecture. If you have any questions that you would like to pose to the speaker, you may do so using your X handles using the hashtag EximCDAL37, that is EXIMCDAL37. As part of its commitment to sustainability and inclusive growth, Exim Bank honors and welcomes its esteemed guests by planting trees, saplings in their name instead of perishable flowers. To mark the occasion of the 37th Commencement Day Lecture, we have planted 74 mango trees, 37 in each of our guests' name in Chatra district, Jharkhand, in collaboration with Sankalp Taru Foundation. Sankalp Taru is a pioneering NGO dedicated to IT-enabled afforestation across India. The fruit-bearing trees planted on farmers' land will help in creating a long-term source of supplementary income for rural households. This initiative supports horticulture-based livelihoods while helping reduce the farmers' dependence on seasonal crops. Alongside, the plantation also contributes to environmental conservation by increasing green cover, improving soil health, and supporting local biodiversity. May I request Ms. Harsha Bangari, MD of Exim Bank, to present the certificate to Mr. M. Nagraju, Secretary, DFS. Next, I request MD to kindly present the certificate to Professor Kiko Honda. I would now request Ms. Harsha Bangari, MD Exim Bank, to present the introductory remarks and introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Yogita. Ms. Kiko Honda, Professor, Waseda Business School, Waseda University. Shri M. Nagaraju, Secretary, Department of Financial Services, Government of India. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very, very good evening to all of you. On behalf of the Export-Import Bank of India, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to Exim Bank's 37th Commencement Day Annual Lecture. I would also like to take this opportunity to extend a warm welcome and express our sincere thanks to Shri M. Nagaraju for being with us this evening. As many of you may be aware, Exim Bank's Commencement Day Lecture series was initiated in 1986 to mark the bank's commencement day. It represents the bank's ongoing endeavors in encouraging discussions on latest trends in international relations, global trade, finance, investment flows, and related economic developments. Over the years, with the encouragement and support from the Government of India, business community, academia, and other stakeholders, the Commencement Day lecture series has earned high recognition in Mumbai's public life. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for us to have Ms. Kiko Honda with us this evening. While Professor Honda is well known to many of us, I would like to take the privilege of formally introducing her by highlighting a few aspects of her illustrious career. Ms. Kiko Honda is professor at Waseda's Business School, Waseda University, where she teaches sustainable investing and corporate governance. She also serves as a chair of the board of the University of Tokyo. In addition, she is a member of the United Nations Investment Management Committee and serves on the boards of Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group and Recruit Holdings. She has also served as a chief executive officer of the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, that's MIGA, of the World Bank Group, where she led initiatives to promote foreign direct investment in emerging markets. In MIGA, Professor Honda launched MIGA's first Gender CEO Award in 2016 as part of a personal commitment to promote the visibility of female leaders. During 2020 to 2024, she was also an adjunct professor at Columbia University's School of International Finance and Public Affairs. Earlier in her career, she spent 24 years at McKinsey and Company, becoming the first woman in Asia to be promoted to senior partner. Given her profound knowledge, experience, listening to Professor Kiko Honda this evening will indeed be a rewarding experience for all of us. She has chosen to speak on an interesting and pertinent theme, sustainable investing, where it is coming from and where it is going. There has been a rapid growth in issuances of green bonds, social bonds, and sustainability linked instruments by both corporates and governments. As per data from the World Bank, the cumulative amount of green, social, sustainability linked, and transition bonds have reached an impressive US dollar 6.8 trillion as of December 2025. These issuances are also gaining traction in emerging markets, which represented nearly 14% of the total sustainable bonds issuances as of December 2025. Exim Bank has remained responsive to these evolving dynamics as market borrowings constitute nearly 88% of the bank's total resources. The bank has been pioneer in terms of sustainability issuances from India. In March 2015, the bank had launched India's first USD denominated 5-year Regis Green Bond. In 2019, the bank also issued its first US denominated socially responsible bond. More recently, the bank has firmed up its internal ESG taxonomies to better align with the investor expectations and international best practices. In December 21, the bank develops its ESG framework for issuance of sustainability bonds and loans and the use of proceeds for projects in 6 green and 4 social areas. Till date, the bank has successfully issued green and sustainable bonds aggregating US dollar 1.75 billion under the ESG framework. These resources are being deployed towards financing green, transition, social, and sustainability linked investments of eligible Indian companies. In response to the growing demand for such financing, the bank has also introduced a dedicated sustainable finance program to finance investment in green as well as hard to abate sectors. Since the program's introduction in November 2023, the bank has supported over 60 borrowers under the program. And these are across various sectors, including solar, energy, wind, clean tech, sustainable farming, sustainability solutions, etc. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I once again welcome all of you to Exim Bank's Commencement Day lecture. I would also like to welcome all those who are watching the lecture live on various social media platforms. We sincerely hope that today's lecture will be useful in deepening our understanding of sustainable investing and the evolving global landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam, for the welcome address and for underscoring the relevance of sustainable investments for Exim Bank. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. M. Nagaraju, Secretary DFS, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Mr. Nagaraju is an IAS officer from the 1993 batch. Over the course of his service, he has served at state, national, and international level in the areas of public order, revenue and development administration, tribal development finance, international economic relations, industries and commerce, healthcare, and state finances. I would request Mr. Nagaraju to kindly deliver the special remarks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Keiko Honda, Professor, Waseda Business School, and today's commencement lecture guest, and Ms. Harsha Bangari, Managing Director, Export-Import Bank of India, and all the chairmen and MDs of public sector banks and other senior and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me at the outset express how pleased I am today to be present for 37th Commencement Day annual lecture. It's a privilege to listen to Professor Keiko Honda today. She has a very vast experience in development finance, and she was mentioning to me that she is currently, I remember when she was in MEGA, but then now she told me that she's also in a few companies in Japan which are very important for the financial sector growth as well as resilience. I will make a few brief remarks because I'm not the speaker. You know, sustainable investments are critical for all the countries in the world, particularly for India, for several reasons. One, we are still yet to become a developed country, unlike many countries where they already become developed countries, and now they have to build their infrastructure, climate resilience infrastructure they have to build. There is no need for them to take up investments in the greenfield infrastructure development, unlike India. India, while providing basic infrastructure, India also has to think in terms of ensuring climate proof and resilience. Because India is one of the countries in the world which will be impacted very highly by the climate change concern. Whether the question is whether the government public finance alone will be sufficient to meet the demands of sustainable uh, investing. Obviously not. I think all of us are aware. It is private sector which has to pool in resources so that that can be utilized for investment for the long-term growth of the country. Now, two things were done broadly. One is, of course, the RBI has laid down a framework for raising the green bonds, and similarly, the capital markets and the capital market side. SEBI also has a framework. Government of India has a framework for raising capital market capital bonds for green bonds. Now, some of our public sector banks also raised green bonds. I think Bank of Baroda recently has raised some money, and the bigger banks also will do shortly. And now, the one, let's say, for example, one reason we have one target, nationally determined target we have in the country is net zero by 2070. This is a multi-sectoral mission in the Government of India. The large number of ministries are part of this the process. As per Niti Aayog estimate, we require almost about 23 trillion US dollars to meet the zero emissions by 2070. In fact, we estimated at that point of time, little more than 30 trillion is required from the public sector, and the rest is from the private sector. Public sector also raising the resources very Herculean task. They don't have so much resources. But if you can mobilize long-term capital from the institutional financing, one is, of course, I have in mind is one is insurance, where a lot of funding is available. The other is pension. Pension also another source of long-term patient capital one can actually tap. Unfortunately, currently, the Indian pension fund corpus is very small, even compared to some of the smallest countries in Europe, because of lack of organized pension ecosystem in the country. There are multiple agencies managing a lot of pensions, and therefore, we are not able to have the impact of aggregation of pension landscape in the country for the development of infrastructure. Now, government has taken in the recent past, at least last 10 years, government has taken a comprehensive approach for developing the necessary regulatory institutional incentive framework for promoting green financing and sustainable investments. If you look at it, we have Power Ministry, we have some incentives, Renewable Ministry also, including there is a scheme to promote coal gasification in the Coal Ministry. Similarly, the regulatory approach of Minister of Environment and Forest also, some measures are there to promote green financing. Now, we would like the financial institutions to take steps to mobilize additional capital required, because depending on the project could be little more, it may demand some premium, or it could be lower also. People who are very much interested in the climate change and initiative to finance climate change actions, they may subscribe to the bonds. But if you want to finance the infrastructure, it requires additional cost. Therefore, additional cost requirement, India has always been asking for support from the developed countries, but it has not come till now. Despite that, government has been taking efforts to mobilize, and Exim Bank, as usual, is also playing important role in supporting sustainable finance. Now, I know that they have a sustainable finance program which was launched in 2023, and to support green investments in green sector as well as transition. But Exim Bank's scale is a little smaller compared to the public sector banks. I think we should also be able to do it. Now that as the country is entering into a phase of more maturity in the sustainable development, and now there is much more global alignment of norms and regulatory mechanism on the sustainable development. I hope we will move towards robust ecosystem for developing the sustainable development. I'm sure today's lecture by Professor Honda will provide valuable insights on how developed world has tackled this issue, and then what possibly could be done by India to attract new investments and also build our infrastructure in a sustainable manner. With these words, I thank Exim Bank and to all of you for giving me a very patient hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for the insightful address and setting the tone for today's annual lecture. Your remarks highlighted the importance of sustainability in the Indian context and the initiatives undertaken by the Government of India. As we proceed with the next segment for today's program, may I respectfully request Ms. Harsha Bangari and Mr. M. Nagaraju to kindly take their seats in the front row of the audiences. As we set the stage, I would once again request our audience who have joined us in person and online to pose any questions to the speaker on your X handles using the hashtag EximCDAL37, that is EXIMCDAL37. Without further ado, we now turn to the eagerly awaited lecture by Professor Kiko Honda. I invite you, Professor Honda, to kindly deliver the much awaited address.
Good evening. Well, thank you very much for your very kind introduction. It is my honor and pleasure to speak at this esteemed event at India Exim Bank. Today's theme is sustainable investing, where it comes from and where it is going to. Sustainable investing was a major focus just a few years ago. However, there is now growing skepticism about sustainable and ESG investing. Critics increasingly question the real impact of ESG investing. At the same time, it is important to understand why private institutional investors continue to pursue sustainable investing. Meanwhile, global sustainable for sustainable data disclosure are steadily advancing in Europe and the rest of Asia. In this context, sustainable investing is at an inflection point, making it an especially compelling topic to examine today. Let me briefly outline today's agenda. First, we will discuss the definition of sustainable investing as well as the history and background of ESG investing. Next, I will share my research on how investors are engaging with sustainable and ESG investing. I will then address a frequently asked question: does ESG or sustainable investing improve returns? Given the challenges that our field is facing, I will also touch on key issues and concerns. Finally, we will explore where sustainable investing is heading. Before we begin, let me offer one perspective on scale. Asset management companies collectively manage approximately $120 trillion globally. About half of this is from the United States and Canada, around 25% from Europe, and roughly 6% from Japan. Many people define ESG investing and sustainable investing differently. After interviewing asset owners and asset managers across Asia, the United States, and Canada, with combined asset under management of over $25 trillion, I would like to propose the following definition. ESG investing integrates non-finance factors such as environmental, social, and governance ESG factors that are important for stakeholders in investment decisions, both to mitigate risk and unlock opportunities. By the way, with ESG investing, investors seek higher returns in the longer term. And also, this is important to say, not all ESG investing intends to solve social or developmental issues. This perspective may differ somewhat from what you might expect when you hear the term sustainable investing. However, it reflects a consistent view shared by institutional investors, including both asset owners and asset managers across regions. And also, this slide highlights the major ESG factors. The World Bank Group's IFC International Corporations and Omega Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agencies support private investment in developing countries and have established their own E&S performance standards, along with the member nations. In addition, SASB, now part of the International Sustainable Standards Board, provides a materiality map. Based on these two frameworks, I have compiled the key ESG factors. So you can see, in addition to the environmental and social issues, factors such as cybersecurity, data security, and compliance are increasingly important. Therefore, ESG factors are not necessarily limited to those that directly create social impact. Rather, they include a broader set of considerations that affect cash flow or the corporate value. The history of ESG investing is not always well understood. So let us briefly look at its origins. ESG investing was the first proposed in 2004 by the United Nations initiative led by former Secretary General Kofi Annan. Why did he take this initiative? I would now like to take a closer look at the background behind this development. This chart shows two major sources of capital flow to developing countries: official development assistance, or ODA, and foreign direct investment, FDI. Until around 1992 or so, ODA was the largest source of the funding. However, as just pointed out during the previous speech, after that, FDI surpassed ODA and became the dominant source of capital. Former SG Kofi Annan recognized that. Then he understood that a private financial institutions controls a growing share of global capital and it would play a critical role in supporting development. In 1999, he first proposed the UN Global Compact. This is a voluntary initiative that calls on CEOs to commit to universal sustainability principles and to take actions in support of UN goals. So he didn't ask each corporate, rather ask the CEOs individually to commit it. I think many of you know the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, but SDGs are not the first global development goals set by the United Nations. In 2000, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Millennium Development Goal, or MDGs, which were highly ambitious, including the goal of reducing extreme poverty by 2015. So SG Annan recognized that a public funding alone would not be sufficient to achieve these ambitious goals. In response, in 2004, he reached out to the CEOs of 50 major financial institutions, encouraging them to work together to address global development challenges. 20 institutions agreed to engage in discussion with the UN team with support from the Swiss government. Through those discussions, the UN team realized that it would be difficult to directly mobilize, or I would say directly donate money from the financial institutions of the private investors. Because I think the money they have is not their money. The money is their clients' money, including pension funds. Instead, the UN team recognized that many investors were not fully aware of global issues that could materially affect corporate value. As a result, UN shifted their strategy from seeking funding to raising awareness of these issues. The effort led to the publication of report, Who Cares Wins, in 2004. This is widely regarded as the first formal articulation of ESG investing. In that sense, we can say that ESG investing began in 2004. However, ESG investing did not gain broad attention until around 2015. One reason for this delay was the influence of prominent economists such as Milton Friedman, who argued that social responsibility could undermine the potential financial return of investment. So therefore, it is not until development such as the Paris Agreement that awareness of the importance of non-financial factors for both social and corporate value significantly increased. We have discussed the history and definition of ESG investing. Before turning to sustainable investing, let us look at impact investing, which has relatively clear definition. The Global Impact Investing Network, a nonprofit organization, defined impact investing in 2009 as the use of for-profit investment to address social and environment challenges. The World Bank Group is International Financial Corporation, or IFC, further refined the concept. IFC emphasized the importance of assessing expected income before making an investment. Their definition states that impact investing is an approach that aims to generate measurable positive social and environmental impact. This one essentially saying, define it ex ante. Then this also have to come alongside financial returns. It is seen as a significant opportunity to mobilize capital toward investment that deliver measurable social, economic, or environmental outcome. This is, as a matter of fact, highly ambitious definition. I was part of MIGA. I was heading MIGA at this time. So of course, I'm part of the discussion team. We thought this is wonderful, but at the same time, we also agreed this is very ambitious. Then long story short, in 2022, leadership in defining impact investing effectively shifted from the IFC to GIIS, or Global Impact Investing Network, that I just mentioned first, definition. GIIN defines this time impact investing as an investment made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social and environmental impact alongside financial returns. So ex ante thing is somewhat disappeared, but consistently remained here is with the impact investing, investors are supposed to seek social or environmental returns or impact, which is measurable, and financial returns. By the way, some of you may assume that impact investors are willing to accept lower financial returns. Unfortunately, this is not necessarily the case. Research by GIIN that I just mentioned, their final definition of impact investing, show that are approximately 65% of impact investors expect market level returns. Many of these investors, such as pension funds, manage money on behalf of the others. As a result, they are generally not in a position to compromise on financial performance. By now, we have looked at ESG investing and impact investing. Let us now turn to sustainable investing, along with other related approaches, which is philanthropy, social responsible investing, and responsible investing, among which philanthropy is the easiest to understand. So it does not seek financial returns. Rather, its primary objective is to create positive social impact. So next, social responsible investing, SRI, was started in 1928. The Pioneer Fund in the United States launched the first SRI fund focusing on excluding investment in tobacco, alcohol, and gambling. The Pioneer Fund still exists today. It was acquired by Amundi of France, and it operates within this French group. Investors, often guided by religious beliefs, avoided investing in sectors such as weapons, alcohol, and other activities inconsistent with their values. But unfortunately, its prominence declined after the 1929 financial crisis. In 1930, S or social was dropped since the industry could not agree on what social actually meant. But interestingly enough, another incident emerged in 1971. Leon Sullivan, a board member of General Motors in 1971, drew up a code of conduct for practicing business with South Africa. This practice became known as the Sullivan Principles and was adopted by more than 125 US-based corporations. Essentially, they are against the apartheid policy of South Africa at that time. And it is amazing that at least 100 corporations, including GM, at least totally withdraw their operation once in South Africa. So responsible investing is the term used by the Principle for Responsible Investment. The PLI was established to promote ESG investing with the support of UN. However, the term is now used less frequently, and its definition remains somewhat unclear. Then a PLI itself defining responsible investing is somewhat similar to ESG investing or sustainable investing. So now we discussed everything. Let's discuss sustainable investing. As for sustainable investing, its definition is also not well established. In recent years, amid growing anti-ESG sentiment, some investors have shifted terminology just from ESG investing to sustainable investing. But I will return this point later. So overall, we have relatively clear definition for ESG investing and impact investing, sustainable investing. By contrast, is less clearly defined. But I would say it's generally considered close to the ESG investing. If we use ESG investing and sustainable investing interchangeably, the scale is significant, at least $30 trillion. I'm not talking about billions, it's $1 trillion in asset under management. In contrast, impact investing, which is wonderful, which create financial returns at the same time create social or environmental impact. But this impact investing remains much smaller, with approximately $1.6 trillion asset under management. This representing less than 5% of ESG or sustainable investing. So this is the definition and a scope and a breadth and depth of ESG or sustainable investing. Now, let us move to the next agenda, how investors are conducting ESG or sustainable investing. I conducted the research involving 35 investors, including both asset owners and asset managers, on ESG and sustainable investing. After the extensive PC research, I have interviewed all of them at the senior level, sometimes CEO, sometimes Chief Investment Officer. The interviewees include investors from Europe, the United States, Canada, Japan, and other parts of Asia. Unfortunately, I couldn't interview Indian organization, which I would like to do it at some point. But so far, Indian voice is not reflected here. This is my apology. By the way, their combined asset under management exceeds $25 trillion, giving $120 trillion is the size of the ocean. So this is actually quite large. But also I should note that a sample is skewed toward relatively large institutional investors. So I've not well covered small or medium-sized asset owners or asset managers. First, I asked for their definition of ESG investing. The answers varied significantly across institutions. In my interview with 35 investors, I heard around 20 different definitions, and about 15 respondents said they are still working on their definition. Let me share 3 definitions that I found particularly insightful. The first is from JP Morgan Asset Management, which is environmental social governance, ESG factors are non-financial considerations that are important for stakeholders when assessing a company's performance and can be used both to mitigate risk and unlock opportunities in an investment portfolio. Yes, I think my first definition was something close to this one. Another definition I found comparing comes from Schroders. This is a UK-based asset manager. ESG investment covers a range of activities that recognize the relationship between companies and society and environment in which they operate, as well as with the stakeholders who control them. The third definition is not a company. As a matter of fact, this is a gentleman, Dr. Georg Kill. He's currently working reading a private asset management company. But the reason I just kind of specifying him as an individual is he's the senior staff of former Secretary General Kofi Annan when he organized the discussion with 20 financial institutions. So he himself involved in that Fouquet's Wayne's Publishing. His definition is ESG investing is the integration of environmental, social, and governance factors into investment processes and decision making. These factors, while traditionally outside of financial analysis, may have a financial relevance. I think this definition is also well diagnosed and well used by many of the people. So that's why ESG factors currently often referred as a non-financial factors. When you actually face the ESG factor disclosure, now everybody's calling non-financial factor disclosure. So I think with three definitions, a common thread across all those three definitions is the integration of non-financial factors into what has traditionally been purely financial decision-making process. I believe this is a key point. Then asked when they started ESG investing, the response were quite varied, spread out. Although I just mentioned the term ESG investing was introduced in 2004, some investors has already been applying similar concepts even before that. At the same time, many did not begin ESG investing immediately following the UN initiative. Overall, it appears that both asset owners and asset managers took time to consider how to approach ESG and gradually began investing under the philosophy in their own way. The next question was why they engage in ESG investing. I initially expected that many investors would aim to generate social impact alongside financial returns. However, the results were very different. So my hypothesis was wrong. Approximately 60% of investors stated that their primary objective is to achieve higher financial returns. This suggests that for many institutional investors, ESG is not primarily about the value or the impact to the society, but rather a tool to enhance risk-adjusted returns. To do it by incorporating material non-financial factors into the investment decision. This naturally leads to the next topic, the financial impact of ESG and sustainable investing. Why do we emphasize higher return? It is truly about the impact or simply about fulfilling fiduciary duty. If investors are serious about maximizing returns, they must take a long-term perspective. Yet many ESG approaches, especially exclusion-based strategy, actually narrow the investment universe, which can limit opportunities. So the real question is ESG about values or is it about the better investing? If it is about better investing, ESG should not be about avoiding sectors, but about identify all material factors, including non-financial ones that affect corporate value. Importantly, ESG factors often represent low probability but high impact risk, so-called tail risks, that may not be captured in traditional financial analysis. Over the long term, these risks can significantly alter the risk return profile of investment. In this sense, changes in the long-term risk and return beyond what is valuable, or visible in conventional financial statement may be closely linked to the company's ESG performance. Therefore, ESG integration is not a moral choice. It is simply good investment practice. By the way, we just mentioned the tail risk. I think what's going in the Middle East right now, there's, I would say, geopolitical risk. Many of us under probably estimated because it's the tail risk. But unfortunately, it is happening right now. Going forward, if some of us continue to do sustainable investing, we have to realize the probability, or we have to reassess the probability of geopolitical risk that may be happening. If once it's happened, it's actually relatively bigger risk. That's what it is. When evaluating the relationship between ESG and financial returns, the investment horizon is critically important. The effect of ESG consideration differ between the short term and long term. In the short term, exclusion-based strategy may lead to lower returns as they constrain the investment universe and may limit diversification. Moreover, the presence of so-called Shin investors can distort outcomes. Asset excluded on ESG ground may trade at discounted valuations, potentially generating higher short-term returns for investors willing to hold them. Another key consideration is the methodology used to assess ESG performance. Outcomes may vary depending on whether one relies on aggregate ESG scores, focusing on specific material factors, or adapts alternative frameworks. From a historical perspective, ESG integration can be understood as a mechanism for incorporating non-financial factors that may signal low probability but high impact risk. As such, ESG consideration may alter the long-term risk-return profile of investments. Therefore, ESG integration is best viewed not as a constraint, but as an approach to improving long-term investment performance through a more comprehensive assessment of risk and opportunity. Let me review one case of ESG and sustainable investment returns. The Government Pension Investment Fund, GPIF of Japan, this is the world's largest pension fund. They began incorporating ESG investing approximately 10 years ago. By the way, GPIF's investment horizon is 100 years, since they don't really need to withdraw the money from now. I think Japanese probably living a little too long these days. So we have probably enough money to pay for it. Therefore, their investment horizon says they actually publicly saying 100 years. This is not my word; it's their word. So they actually adopted the ESG as a part of this initiative. GPIF identified non-ESG equity indices and allocated capital accordingly. Because each ESG indices has a corresponding parent benchmark, it is possible to directly compare their relative performance. Since inception, 7 out of 9 ESG indices have outperformed their respective parent indices, suggesting a positive relationship, ESG integration, and returns. However, performance varies over time. For example, between April 2024 and March 2025, 3 of the parent indices outperformed their ESG counterparts, highlighting the short-term fluctuations. Overall, at least within GPIF's investment universe, the evidence still suggests that ESG or sustainable investing can contribute to enhancing returns over the long term, despite period of short-term divergence. By the way, GPIF itself changed how to call this investing. They were calling up until last year ESG investing. This year's report just came up. It's actually calling this investing as a sustainable investing, just for your information. The next agenda is sustainable investing is major challenges in a sustainable investing. There are several major challenges in sustainable investing. First, there is still a lack of clear and commonly accepted definition of sustainable investing. Therefore, some investors, typically like retail investors, think this is our investing, it's good for the society. Or some people even saying this is good for climate change. But that's not necessarily the case, as I mentioned before. The second challenge here is we continue to face limitation in the data, particularly in terms of data availability, accuracy, and comparability. And third issue is identifying which ESG factors are truly material to corporate value. This still remains very complex. First, there is ongoing ambiguity regarding whether sustainable investing can consistently generate excess returns. We showed a GPIF case. However, there are not more cases like this. So this is the challenge. And finally, more recently, sustainable investing has become a source of political division, especially in the United States. Among these, the first, second, and fourth challenges have been long-standing. I'm sorry, I think I'm probably showing the wrong page. The third has become more prominent in recent years, while the fifth, the political division, is an emerging and increasingly significant issue today, especially in the US. In terms of data disclosures and standard setting, there is a long and interesting history, so let me introduce here. A number of NPOs and NGOs have taken the lead in developing various initiatives. Major frameworks include SASB, Integrated Reporting or IRL, TCFDs, and GLI. As a result, multiple standards have coexisted for a long time, creating a fragmented landscape for sustainable disclosure. Effort has also been made to bring greater coherence to this fragmented landscape. The World Economic Forum, which operate conference in Davos every year, they have attempted to integrate various standards by convening key stakeholders for discussion. I think first they invited GLI, IL, SASB, as well as CDFB, but GLI has a different philosophy they dropped in the middle. So therefore, as a result, the IFAS Foundation proposed the establishment of International Sustainability Standard Board, or ISSB, to consolidate existing framework of SASB, IRL, and CDSB. Then this ISSB has introduced a building blocks approach where it sets a global baseline and individual countries or region can build upon it by adding their own specific requirements. I'm not going to go into the detail, but in Europe, European Union has systematically developed ESG disclosure standard over the past decade. In Japan, SSBJ, or Sustainable Standard Board of Japan, recently finalized its standard in February 2026 to align specifically with IFRS S1 and S2 standard. For major company on the Tokyo Stock Exchange Prime section, these disclosures are now becoming legally mandatory. By the way, market cap is over 3 trillion yen. Company have to disclose these non-financial factors along with the specifying material factors from March 2027. How about the SEC? SEC initiated the US climate disclosure effort with its 2022 draft proposal. This was similar to TCFD. It's well written, but it's very tight. So therefore, many of us, or let's say too many comments were sent, public comments were sent to SEC. But this one, let me talk about the current situation a bit later. By the way, I have to also tell you one more thing. While US and Japan have adopted a single materiality approach, focusing on the financial impact to corporate values, Europe has embraced double materiality. This broader approach, or double materiality approach, requires company to disclose factors that impact not only corporate value, but also for the environment and social society at large. Therefore, it's more complicated. So this is happening. And by the way, one more thing has happened. The market for ESG data and index providers have matured significantly. Most large asset managers now source or buy information or data from multiple ESG data companies to ensure comprehensive coverage and to mitigate methodological biases. So this is now, it's becoming a big industry. So finally, we examine the current trajectory of sustainable investing. In 2026, the industry has shifted toward a pragmatic and result-oriented approach. While Europe and Japan move toward mandatory disclosure, the US landscape is fractured. many so-called red states, red state is a state that a Republican has a strong power or strong presence, are now enforcing strict registration, such as Texas's Senator Bill 13, to exclude farms that are divest from fossil oils. This has led to the removal of major banks from state pension fund management and municipal bond underwriting. So this is not easy for many financial institutions, as you can imagine. In response to rising political pressure, major UN financial institutions are undergoing a significant shift in their ESG positioning. They are seeing a move away from a public climate commitment, exemplified by BlackRock and several major banks, or maybe I would say most of the US banks, withdrawing from the global net zero alliances toward a more cautious strategy known as green hashing. Especially firms are rebranding ESG investing as sustainable investing to use a broader, less politicized framing. While pragmatism in a current trend, we must not to lose sight of the facts. For example, global greenhouse gas emissions are still increasing. The tangible impact of climate change on corporate value is unavoidable. Simultaneously, we must address emerging S&G risk. I'm sorry. I think among the S&G risk, I just like to point out cybersecurity risk, data security risk, as the rise of AI and quantum computing threatens to redefine data security within the next few years. Also, don't let the headlines about delay mislead you. Well, the EU have introduced Stop the Clock Directive to give mid-sized company have more time. Europe's sustainable finance agenda is not showing down. It is simply becoming more pragmatic, focusing on high-quality data from the largest players first. Moving forward, our approach to sustainable investing should be built on transparency and financial rigor. This means establishing clear return expectation relative to market benchmarks and focusing exclusive on material ESG factors that drive corporate value. By enhancing our data disclosure and maintaining a net zero tolerance policy for greenwashing, we can protect our reputation while delivering the result our stakeholders expect. When it comes to disclosure, less is often more if it is the right less. The key for any corporation today is selecting material factors that are truly relevant to its business model and corporate value. If a factor doesn't move the needle on your corporate value, it should not be the focus of your reporting. So, of course, what's going to be the next for the ESG of the sustainable investing. This is only my proposal. However, we see, I just like to mention a few things. First of all, there are many factors which impact corporate cash flow, corporate value. Cybersecurity is probably like a biggest material factor for most of the financial institutions. Data security is along with it. As a board member of a private bank, I would not surprise that someday cybersecurity issue will hit some of the private banks. Bangladesh Central Bank is not the only one, I have to say. And second, also climate change is progressing. We cannot really avoid it. And then third, this year, we have learned geopolitical risk could be materialized. I also thought geopolitical risk is the tail risk. Highly unlikely. But if it happens, there is an impact on our economy. Therefore, it must be the impact on the corporate cash flow, corporate value. We don't really need to, or we shouldn't underestimate the potential risk coming from the geopolitical risk. So this is my 1 cent for your sword. It has been a pleasure discussing the trajectory of sustainable investing with you all, and I hope this recommendation provides some hint for your own disclosure journey as well as your investment journey. I'm very happy to open the floor for any question. I just like to say thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's my honor to be here today.
Thank you, Professor, for your keenly perspective lecture. You reflected on how sustainable investing has evolved and where it is headed. We understood from your lecture that the sustainable investing landscape is not fading, it is evolving. It is said that questions are the beginning of wisdom. And for today's Q&A session, I would like to invite on stage Ms. Lata Venkatesh, a senior business journalist with extensive experience across television, print, and wire services. She has begun her career at CNBC TV 18 as the chief of the Mumbai News Bureau and currently serves as the consulting editor at the network. Over the years, she has earned a strong reputation as one of the most astute observers of the Reserve Bank of India and is widely respected for her commentary on banking and financial sector issues, money markets, and broader macroeconomic trends. With deep expertise in tracking stocks, currency, debt, and broader commodities markets, she has also held significant editorial roles at the Economic Times and Dow Jones Newswires, spending 5 years at each organization. Ms. Venkatesh holds a degree in economics and politics and has completed a doctoral degree in political science. We welcome you on stage, Ms. Lata Venkatesh, to pose select questions received from our audience to Professor Honda. We also invite Professor Honda to join us on stage for addressing the questions. As we begin, I would once again request our audience who have joined us in person and online to pose any questions to the speaker on your X handles using the hashtag EximCDAL37, that is EXINCDAL37. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that very generous introduction. And thank you, Professor Honda, for a very enlightening and thought-provoking lecture. And since my thinking has been provoked, I will begin where I'm intrigued most. Do you think ESG as a concept can survive President Trump's drill, baby, drill?
I think now ESG is not a word used in Washington, D.C. right now. Um, I think we don't, but at the same time, the current president of the United States, he does recognize the risk of cybersecurity. As a matter of fact, I think current U.S. government asking all financial institutions as well as all corporate to spend the money or invest the money to enhancing to avoid any major, you know, negative situations potentially caused by the cybersecurity. So therefore, some of the things still remains open. Then I think the government is actually guiding for that.
Yes, he is encouraging onshore investing. To that extent, it is safeguarding the United States from geopolitical risk. But more seriously, if your breakup said that out of the $128 trillion invested in ESG by ESG funds, 50% is from the United States. And if, as you pointed out, states like Texas, Florida, are actually blacklisting funds for not investing in fossil fuel, do you think that, at least in the short term, people may actually withdraw from ESG funds? Do you think this 128 trillion recedes?
It is interesting. New York State, California State, as well as Illinois State pensions are still doing sustainable investing.
So the larger ones are still investing. Is that what you're saying? Okay, fine. I mean, that's hopeful for us. The other kind of danger I foresee is if we stick only to E of the ESG environment, it's very clear that global warming, the victims are the global south, where the EMs reside. And those who are calling the tune are in the global north, notably the United States. So considering that the tune is being called by the haves, do you think there is a danger that ESG may not get the prominence?
Well, probably, I think EFG is a little broader concept. I think if you just like me to comment on the climate change, I'm more than happy to do so. Would you like me to focus on the climate change at this moment?
If you could be a little louder.
Yeah, I think ESG is a little broader term, so many things in it. But if you would like me to focus on climate change, I'm more than happy to make one comment.
Please.
Yeah. Climate change is definitely kind of bringing the negative impact, but not only to the global south, but also even in the United States. One example I can show you is there is a homeowner insurance in United States which covers house owner against the risk of fire and also any like a flooding and so forth. The premium of such insurance has increased by about 30% from 2020 to 2023. And so this is actually a huge increase. So a lot of people cannot really afford to buy insurance against their houses. And in addition, since some of the states' risk is so large, therefore some of the large, relatively financially stable insurance companies such as Allstate, State Farm, decided not to sell any
Insurance against fire.
Yes, in California states. So this is they're private insurance companies, so they feel like it doesn't really make sense with the risk returns. You cannot really do the business, right? I mean, they stopped doing it. So, but I would say probably insurance company has the best data. How much damage is happening? So therefore, how much have to be paid? I think, the risk assessment is probably done best by the PNC insurance company. So I guess this is a real story.
So do you think that because of these market realities, ESG may actually make a comeback, may prevail in spite of the political rhetoric?
Well, I cannot really say it's come back or not come back, but at least one thing I can say, if you want to buy PNC insurance company's stock, you probably want to take a quick look at it.
Okay. All right. That's very helpful advice. But, well, let me come to the other big threat beyond the war and beyond geopolitics. We have artificial intelligence staring us in the face, and that's asking for power. That is asking. Data centers are demanding investment in power, and fossil fuel happens to be cheaper. Coal, for instance, in India happens to be cheaper. So even if President Trump's term is over, artificial intelligence term is not over, it's barely beginning. So do you think that may pose a bigger challenge that may reinvent coal or give a new life to fossil fuel?
I think that's really good point. Short term, of course, coal-fired power generation is cheaper. But longer term, as we can just see from the data of PNC insurance companies in the United States, similar things may be happening here. Okay, Europe, Canada, North America, the problem from the climate change is the wildfire in mountain, which has been spreading out to some of the houses. That's the problem. I think Asia problem is not a fire because we never got right that
Our
far.
problem is pollution created by coal.
Pollution as well as maybe flooding, or I don't know. I mean, I think it's the water problem. That's the problem. Yes. So to answer to your question, we have to be bit more in a longer term. Therefore, we really have to kind of think about the trade-off.
Yes, so I only hope investors think that way. As you say, water, most of the data centers require huge quantities of water, and they are being placed in centers which are not really water rich. And therefore, how do you think this will evolve? Do you think there can be a very real social conflict between data centers wanting power and consumers protesting against? How do you see it evolving?
Again, I think I think you're talking about like a trade-off, right? I think having a data center definitely brings jobs. So therefore, there is a overall economy growth of that particular region, possibly even tax may be increasing from the region. But at the same time, the water issue may be coming in, or possibly like lower availability of the power. So, we got a balance. I think we cannot really say no to everything. We may, emergency, we may have to use the coal-fired power plants, although we have to avoid it, but definitely we have to use gas. So net, thinking about like rather than a short term, but the medium to long term impact, how to balance the benefit of today as well as potential loss for the future.
Oh, yes, for us, it may not be even in the long term. It might happen earlier because jobs are a necessity and so is water. So maybe we may see water wars or water versus job wars sooner than many other countries,
Yes,
perhaps.
absolutely.
Can you give us examples? How is the global South approaching ESG? I mean, we are trying to introduce ESG norms. We have gone the distance to discourage coal investing and encourage renewable investing. And I must say that we have had remarkable success in that effort. But what is the example in other states? This is one of the questions coming actually from the audience. How is sustainable investment and financing taking shape in other global South countries?
Okay, I think most of the global South also participated in ISSB discussion. People are reasonably agreeing on integrating more factors into the investment. So therefore, asset owners, asset managers are able to make a better decision. That point, everybody agreed. Then I think most important point right now is for each investment or each project or each corporation, what is the material factors? Climate change, probably not super big impact on the retail industry, but possibly a big thing for cement manufacturers because their emission is quite big. So we really have to think about that. Then, but I have to tell you also, global south have to understand what is the implication for the longer term. But I think I'm very encouraged today, like Indian government keeping the net zero targets by 2070. Japan is net zero by 2050. I think that as long as we keep that, we really have to kind of come up with these things. But achieving that target, it's a little bit of independent from sustainable investing and ESG investing. Sustainable investing in ESG investing is just including non-financial factors in investment decision.
Oh, yes, I can see several governments are at it, even if the US government is receding from it from the moment. But as you very correctly pointed out, it is not the US government. It is 50 governments over there.
Yes.
And the larger ones are still sticking.
Right. Yeah, by the way, I think China also keeping net zero target.
Okay. Well, that's encouraging if a larger number of large countries are sticking to it. Actually, there are questions about the US, even from the audience. How do you see the US scaling back on climate commitments? What's your sense? I mean, if large states like New York and California are still sticking with ESG targets, this 128 trillion, is it falling or do you still see it rising? What has been the experience over the last 1-2 years? Is that number growing or falling?
Well, I think, investors investment horizon is a long term. I think it's logical to stick with it. If people's horizon for looking at the situation and then setting or modifying the regulation is relatively shorter, I think outcome may be different. But also, I have to tell you, the government leaders are selected based on the election. So I am not a US citizen, so I am not in a position to say that's the right thing or wrong thing. But only things I can say is we are sharing this earth. We are living together. So people emit more from one nation is affecting us too. So that's really need to be careful.
Oh, well, that is our problem. If I saw your chart on emissions. India doesn't figure anywhere at the top, but clearly is very high in terms of the impact it feels because of carbon emissions of other countries. We don't have much control of that, which brings me to the question of regulators, and this is a question from the House. What steps are being taken by regulators globally to address first the greenwashing concerns?
Okay, well, first of all, I think financial institutions develop the products and then they're kind of putting some of the names which misread to the investors. Although this ESG investing not necessarily creating a lot of impact in a climate change, but if investors is misread ESG equal to the green, then it's a problem. But my understanding is that those greenwashing is actually kind of started to disappearing.
Okay.
The reason is financial institutions, when they sell the financial products actually kind of have to make a very appropriate explanation. Otherwise, they will be highly regulated.
Okay. So you do find greenwashing tendencies or trends declining.
It's actually coming down. Also, at the same time, we have to improve the financial literacy of the retail investors as well as institutional investors.
Fair enough.
What the products bring to, what that's not.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, let me come to something which you mentioned towards the end of your speech, that geopolitics is the new concern, and that perhaps has to be included by those who are doing sustainable investing,
You mean geopolitical risk?
geopolitical risk.
Yes.
Exactly. Now, if we start including geopolitical risk, it will mean that ESG investors or sustainable investors have to encourage onshoring, have to encourage nearshoring, have to encourage friendshoring. But if that were to happen, we will have too many goals. Do you think ESG gets diluted?
Well, yeah, again, therefore, we cannot really, but I think one things we are learning now is you need to have some alternative sourcing. You cannot really secure the products from one source, which happen to be located in geopolitically relatively vulnerable location. So you have to pick, of course, sourcing from goods from that region could be a little bit of cheaper, but we need to have a little bit of a diversified procurement strategy.
What are you noticing, though, among the many ESG funds that you have studied very closely? Have you seen them incorporating cybersecurity, personal data privacy? Have you seen them including those goals?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
So as the compliance, I think regulation, these days is very complicated. Today, I understand that many audience working in a financial sector. So regulation is very important. So therefore, capability to comply with those rules. Let me say this way: capability to making sure your all staff are appropriately complying to the necessary regulation is very important.
Okay, that's good to hear. Well, in India itself, the Reserve Bank was pushing the case for green investing and sustainable investing and ESG. We heard about it considerably until 2 years ago. And if I remember right, the State Bank of India even drew up, the State Bank is India's largest bank, and they are well represented here.
Yes,
They
we
drew
know
up,
very well.
they mapped the entire country as to the ESG risks regionally. But lately, we are hearing less from the central bank because other concerns are dominating. What is the experience globally? Are central banks pushing their regulated entities to do more ESG investing, to be more concerned about green investing?
Well, unfortunately, I'm hearing less and less about ESG investing, but I'm still hearing that sustainable investing, especially in Europe. Europeans are more consistently kind of thinking about it. By the way, I heard a very interesting story. I was talking with a German insurance companies, and during the course of the interview, they said when individual investors, when they actually come to buy a life insurance, they ask how they are investing, including how they are addressing climate change. Are they really integrating those in investment decision? Then of course, the insurance company's salesperson asked, why are you really asking? Because this is my life insurance. By the way, I think life insurance is a product most of the people buy when they have a first child. They don't buy it when they get married, but they buy when they have a first kid. So I think average age, let's say about 30 years. And then I think, one great things, one big progress happened last 80 years is now we are living longer. So that means you really need to have life insurance company to exist for a long time. It's not 20 years, not 30 years. Highly likely you want to have a life insurance company healthy and existing 40 to 50 years. Then, even buying life insurance, people kind of yelling whether you have long-term perspective. Are you really thinking about non-financial factors? That was the question. I think from this one, I kind of thought like, geez, I probably never asked such questions when I first bought my life insurance. By the way, I also bought when I had my daughter. But I think those are the appropriate question that a retail investors probably should ask when they consider life insurance policy, which company to buy it. I think this level of sophistication, I really hoping like my children's generation will have.
Well, yeah, I must admit that we are a long way away from it. For us, it is first survival and then a better life and then environment. I mean, it's too far fetched, even though we are, more victims of global warming than perhaps many other countries since we are on the Tropic of Cancer. What about Japan itself? You say that there is a lot of awareness in Europe, but next to Europe, where do you see awareness?
Okay. And well, retail investors, financial literacy is not at the level of the Europe yet. But I think one thing I have to tell you is the non-financial factor disclosure. I thought Japan comes last. Turned out to be Japan probably mandatory thing is probably enforced first because first disclosure have to be happening in March 27, which is next year. So although that's for like a large market cap company, only 3 trillion yen and above, so which is actually a lot of the very big ones, but it's coming. So government decided not to delay. Although US abolished, European decided to delay, but Japan decided to keep the pace.
Okay. Well, so next to Europe, I guess, I mean, in certain respects, Japan is preceding or ahead of Europe. What would your advice be to Indian regulators and the government? What should they pursue? Since clearly here, environment is or sustainability and social are goals that come after survival.
Sustainable investing, I would say the government should not enforce. I think this is the choice of investors. But I'm hoping if you're managing pension monies, I would like to have asset manager to have relatively longer term view. Then I think investors, other parties should demand what kind of data disclosure is necessary for them to make a sounding investment decision.
Oh, well, we have some distance to go to get there. In fact, there's another question on that. How do you mobilize private capital towards climate solutions in developing countries? I think the question is clearly asked because in developing countries or in the global south, the climate questions are more important. So how do you draw private capital?
Okay. A lot of developmental financial institutions obviously has objective. For example, World Bank's biggest objective is eradicate extreme poverty. But at the same time, they have a mission to address climate change. So therefore, one way to do it is leverage those ODA tools. Like Amiga and IFC has tools to support the private investors going into the global south while addressing social issues.
How do they support?
For example, Miga's case, they can either reduce the political risks and or enhance the credit of the financing institutions.
Well, that's good to hear because India is waiting for multilateral companies, multilateral bodies to get together to, support climate investing or climate resistant investing. Uh, can you tell us, what are the biggest gap? This is again a question from the audience. What are the biggest gaps today between sustainability commitments and the actual impact on the ground? I mean, the problems of measurement that you spoke about. What do you see a lot of gap between commitments made and impact?
Well, that's are you talking about impact investing? Impact investing, IFC and Omega still actually have to assess the social or environmental impact ex ante, and then they are monitoring it. And that's only started 2019, so there were not a lot of results coming up yet, but I'm carefully watching how things goes.
This is again a question from the house, and this is the last question I have got from the audience, unless some of you want to join in now. You said that ESG investors seek higher returns in your table. That's the table they're referring to. Is that because ESG investors are ready to take higher risk? What explains the expectation of higher returns?
Well, it's not necessary they're seeking higher risk. The reasons they're expecting higher returns is considering more factors. Usually more information improve the investment decision essentially means higher returns. In addition to the financial factor, which I'm pretty sure today's audience know what it is. I'm not really going into the financial factors, but if you have more information, for example, what kind of level of data security is procured by particular bank or the financial institutions or some private, consumer goods company, then that's definitely you can have a better decision. That's why theoretically investment return can be increased with more information.
Yeah, no, I take your point. I am a business journalist, and I have seen that corporate groups which are interested, which have a reputation for doing the right thing, actually get higher valuation. I mean, they're able to raise money more easily than those which don't have that kind of a reputation. So I take your point that on the ground, it is not higher risk; it's actually higher return when you have, when you have a commitment to the right values. Well, just finally, Professor Honda, what is your own assessment at this point in time? Do you think ESG has a better future, or do you think its future is under threat, given the kind of AI developments and other political developments that we spoke about, geopolitical, political, polarization, and AI risks? Do you think it has a brighter future?
I think, ESG investing, obviously had a little bit of backlash from the political sense. If you allow me to call sustainable investing, I think all major asset management companies still doing it. All major asset owners, except for some of the red states that I mentioned. By the way, those are the exceptions, are not necessarily doing it, which essentially means you need to think about those things when you make a decision. I think, probably like a few years from now, if you want to invest in financial institutions, you should at least look at what kind of cybersecurity level that they have.
I take your point. Thank you very much for those encouraging words. As you point out, we should not confuse the reality with the 3 red states or 4 red states, which are punishing investors for not investing in fossil fuels. The point is the others are not, which is, 46, 47 states are not. And a whole lot of other countries, probably 188 of 189 countries, are still backing, socially relevant, sustainable investments or social impact investments. So the hope is there or bright for sustainable investment. Perhaps the bigger worry will be if and when we have water wars and power versus job wars. We hope it will not come to it. Thank you very much, Professor Honda.
Well, thank you so much for having me today.
And thank you, Exim Bank, for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Lata Venkatesh and Professor Honda, for the wonderful Q&A session. It certainly enhanced our understanding of the topic. As we come to the close of today's evening, I invite Ms. Dipali Agarwal, Deputy Managing Director, Export-Import Bank of India, to propose a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Yogita. Good evening, everyone. Shri Nagaraju Sir, Secretary, Departmental of Finance, Financial Services, Professor Kaiko Honda, esteemed dignitaries in the audience, ladies and gentlemen. As we come to the closure of our 37th Commencement Day annual lecture, I have this pleasant duty this evening to propose a formal vote of thanks. On behalf of India Exim Bank, I extend a sincere gratitude to Professor Honda for graciously accepting our invitation. It has been a privilege to listen to such an insightful and eloquent lecture that combined historical perspective, rigorous analysis, and practical relevances. You trace the evolution of sustainable and ESG investing from its origins to its current inflection point, reminding us that sustainable investing is not fading, rather evolving and maturing. You also touched upon why institutional investors continue to pursue sustainable investing as a means of enhancing long-term returns with managing risks. At Exim Bank, particularly as issuers of sustainability bonds in international markets, we do resonate the challenges that you mentioned. Your analysis of the evolving global disclosures landscapes and role of international standards and different approaches across the regions, including Europe, United States, and Japan, are both informative and timely. You have truly enriched our understanding, and thank you so very much for sharing your wisdom and experience. I also take this opportunity to express our heartfelt gratitude towards Sri Nagaraju sir for sparing his valuable time and gracing this occasion. Sir, your remarks are really appreciated, and you do encourage and motivate us to do better and towards our journey to get the net zero by 2070. Our longtime friend, Ms. Lata Venkatesh, always brings in the limelight in our events. Thank you, Lata, for expertly moderating and facilitating discussions on several pertinent issues. I would also like to thank the august audience of diplomats, senior bankers, corporate executives, academicians, representatives from the industry, and research students for joining in such large numbers, both personally and virtually. My gratitude towards the media and representatives for covering this event. And finally, many thanks to my colleagues from India Exim who has worked hard towards organizing this event. For those who are interested in getting a copy of Professor Honda's paper or the PPT, it will be made available on India Exim Bank's website. Once again, thank you everyone and have a good night.
Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of today's wonderful evening. We hope the lecture provided insightful perspectives on sustainable investing. I now request all participants to join us for high tea in the ballroom, please.